Hi, everyone. My name is Gurbeen. Thank you, Carla. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm so happy that you got to try some soup, So we're going to talk a little bit about this, but let me start the story where the story starts. I come from a long line of women, actually, who have been pioneering social justice in a myriad of ways. So my great-grandmother in India would open her door every Wednesday evening. And it didn't matter if you had, a different religion, if you were of a different caste, a different creed, a different belief system, just didn't matter. You could come in, you could meditate, you could lead a meditation or some chanting, whatever, whether you're Buddhist or Hindu or Sikh or Muslim, it didn't matter. Everybody belonged. And that was such a fundamental part of our family. Everyone belonged, And she would make dal and rice or some soup or anything. So if somebody, wanted a meal, they would always have a meal. If somebody was having a stomachache, she would always carry a little medicine pouch with some ginger or turmeric or all those excellent roots. And, she would give that. And then I heard stories afterwards, she passed before I was born, but I heard stories of the neighborhood women collecting together and, supporting another woman who might be experiencing domestic violence. And they would literally protect and stand for her and just say no. So that is my lineage. And so great-grandmother passed it to grandmother, grandmother passed it to mother. And I grew up thinking everybody opens their doors on Wednesday evenings. So everybody, that's what I grew up with, thinking, oh, it's Wednesday night. We're making a gajillion cups of tea. We're having some kind of soup or something, and it doesn't matter, but that's how it happens. That's not how it happens, I learned. It's actually not. And it's kind of sad to me, that it's like that. So, I grew up for the first 8 years in Iran until the revolution happened. The Iranian Revolution happened in 1978. My school was, I went to the American school in Iran, and we were just overcome by soldiers or revolutionaries with major our arms. I remember being a little kid and looking at the front of my classroom, and this man had this gun with, I didn't know what it was called, but a big knife at the top of it, which is a bayonet, and he was pointing it at my teacher. And I was 8, and they were pointing all of us, and we were all in a circle in 3rd grade, and they said, Americans must die. Half my class, more than half my class were Americans. More than, everybody was somehow related to diplomacy or something like this in the school. And I remember feeling terrified, but I also remember being in the bus that day when we were going home, and the bus drivers pushing the crowds aside, because they were breaking our windows, and we were told to hide underneath the seats to save our lives. And they went outside and they said, they're just kids. They're just kids, let them go. They didn't do anything to you. And they were crying and pleading with them. And I was the only kid on my bus that spoke Farsi. And I translated for all the other kids, and I said, it's gonna be okay. We're gonna be okay, guys. And then I ran to the bus driver when they came back in, and I said, take me home last, because they don't understand what you're saying. And they said, no, but you're home. And I said, take me home last, so I can keep telling them. And I knew that day I would never see any of my friends again. I knew that day my life had changed forever. And when I came home and I met my parents, and everybody was crying because our home, which was literally a stone throw behind the American embassy. Like all four corners of our house, like there's a hotel, there's a supermarket, there's two banks, everything was on fire. I lost my home that day. And I know the feeling of not having a home. I know the feeling of not having safety. And it comes from a different place. It comes from war. It comes from, upheaval. So our family that grew up within 4 blocks of each other, no word of a lie, we could walk to any cousin's house, we could hang out with grandparents every evening. We were a tight-knit family, but our family that day was spread around the globe. We left immediately because I held an Iranian passport. My parents, who had also been born in Iran, but claimed Indian heritage at 18, that was the norm. They knew that they weren't at risk, but they knew I was. Khomeini could have turned out to be like Idi Amin and said, no, all Iranian citizens stay and everybody else needs to leave. So immediately that night we gathered whatever, it was our pocket money, that's how we bought our tickets, and the money at the altar where, we always put an offering at the altar. In my culture, I grew up as a Sikh woman, or I was a little girl then, but I grew up in the Sikh tradition and we put money. So we borrowed the money from the altar. We took our pocket money because we couldn't access banks. That's how we bought our tickets. And we literally had one bag and we ran to the airport and we left. Came to Canada and, my father is a self-made businessman and he had 5 factories in Iran. And as much as he wanted to live in Canada at the time, he couldn't. He had people, he had families he was responsible for. And so my brother and I were sent to boarding school. So boarding school is another kind of interesting trauma. I have a fellow Woodstocker here. Heather, nice to see you. And, boarding school is kind of cool if you're ready for it, but at 8, I don't think people are ready to leave their families. And I found it rather traumatic. I missed my family. I had never spent nights away, never mind in the Himalayas, thousands of miles away, and lots of strange people that I didn't know anything about and zero safety. Like, remember this, you go to boarding school, you don't get on with your friends, you live with them. So, not fun, but you know how it is. It's life and you learn to cope. But it really gave me an insight into trauma. It gave me an insight into living and surviving through the ups and downs of life. Now, some people think, oh yeah, going to boarding school is a privilege. Absolutely, you're right, it's a privilege. You gotta have money to go to boarding school. But that doesn't mean it can't be traumatic, right? It doesn't mean that it doesn't teach you how to grow a really hard shell of armor so that you can protect your little heart, because it's painful. And then I came back to Canada at the age of 16 and, that's a whole other cultural shift and all kinds of interesting things. And again, different world, different things to learn. And yet, again, we are the fortunate ones. We are, and I'm very, very conscious of that. And Carla and I were talking about that earlier, what it means to actually have privilege, but also know that there's so much else that needs to be done. So I thought I was going to go to law school. I thought I was going to go to law school and do international work because I had languages. I had lived in so many different countries. Then my father died at 19. And I had to go with my mom to many different lawyers. And I realized very, very quickly that the law is not about justice. It's actually about interpretation. And at 19, You know, my mom was furious with me. She's like, "I know you have to go to law school." I come from an Indian family. If you go to school, you're either becoming a doctor or a lawyer. That's what's happening. I was like, actually, Mom, I don't think this is my path. Like, I don't feel like I need to do interpretation of the law. I actually want to create different kinds of change. So I started to study policy. And I did a master's in international relations, which was incredibly depressing. So I don't recommend it, but you know, I mean, you want to talk about social justice or really big injustices? That's what you need to look at. Tide Aid in particular. Anybody hear of Tide Aid? Please raise your hands. Anybody? Anybody? Okay, yeah. Tide Aid is quite possibly, thank you, the most terrifying evil of all. Oh yeah, we're gonna help. And then we're gonna control with every little piece of, monetary support we give you. We're gonna make sure that you buy exactly what it is that you need to buy. And we're not gonna be able to, help you fix it when it needs to be fixed and all kinds of interesting things. So I'm not gonna get into that, but really look up Tide Aid if you're interested in social justice and international affairs. So I was very, very depressed after social work. I mean, after my degree in international relations, and I was like, oh no, I just can't do this. I can't work for the UN. I can't work for the IMF or the World Bank. I need to find something that speaks to my soul, And so my neighbor, he was a fantastic guy, realized I was in a depression. He's a very good friend. And he said, listen, every weekend I go to the Scott Mission, every weekend. And we start at 5 in the morning and you're gonna come with me. I was like, are you mad? Like 5 in the morning? No, I'm like 20 something, like I don't do 5. Yeah, well, he's like, no, you're gonna do 5. And I was like, oh my God. So, and I'm so grateful because he woke me up. He would just come to my door and I didn't want my mom to wake up and then I get in trouble and blah, blah, blah. And so I marched along with him to the Scott Mission. And I peeled potatoes and I chopped onions and I cursed him for waking me up at 5 in the morning. And yet somewhere in that service, I found myself. Somewhere in that service, I found I love to feed people. And somewhere along the conversations that I had there, I learned you could study a thing called social work. I mean, really? I was talking to the guy working there. I was like, no, you actually get paid to do this job? No, you really do? And he was like, yeah, it's a thing called social work. And I'm like, what? Tell me more. I want to know everything. So I fell in love with this field of service. I fell in love with this field of being able to just sit with somebody when they're having a rough go of it and be able to connect. And I never looked at service from a us and them perspective because I had lived my own trauma. I was sitting next to my peer. I never was sitting next to someone who I wanted to fix or help. Like that is so egotistical and that never was my vibe. But I really was committed to learning more. So I applied to do an MSW, Master of Social Work, but I wanted to focus on policy and evaluation because as you know, I came in from a policy perspective in international relations and I wanted to look at macro level of change, which is why Carla and I get along so well. So how do we look at that? And during my master's, I did different courses, and one of the things that you have to do in an MSW degree is you have to do a co-op placement. Has anybody here done a co-op placement? Anybody? Yeah, okay, great. So co-op placements are fantastic if you get a really good placement. And as luck would have it, I got scooped up by the Michigan Department of Social Services. And I got to be the purse string holder, the grantor And my portfolio at the age of 25 was $300 million. You know, Trump change. So that was a very big responsibility. And I took it very, very seriously. You know, I was one of those students, you know, that just sat there every night making sure, okay, these people want to do this. How can I facilitate this from happening? And if anybody remembers landlines, who remembers landlines? Yeah? Yeah. Okay. So you know the thing about landlines is it's not like a cell phone. So you can't drive from Lansing to Ann Arbor. And if you're driving from Lansing to Ann Arbor, you can't be on, you know, your AirPods and like call people. No. You need to sit at a desk and you got to pick up the phone, and it doesn't matter what time of night it is, you're still connected to a cord. So I would sit there at night and I would be the kid calling everybody saying, hey, so if you add this buzzword to this page to do this, to do whatever, I can give you a lot more money. So could you please do that and resubmit your rep? Yeah, I got in trouble. I got in trouble. I was doing my job too well, apparently. Who cares? I wanted to give as much money to the community because the community is where the work was happening, not in some ivory tower in Lansing with all these policymakers, including me. And then I started to wonder. Sometimes, you know, wondering is a good thing. So make space for that in your life. I started to wonder, what if we looked at Detroit versus Sterling Heights, let's say, and we know Detroit, Flint, all these areas have very, very serious needs. What if we just allocated per capita, right? To say, okay, we have this budget, instead of making everybody jump through 1 trillion hoops and monitoring them endlessly, which I found completely futile. And my poor boss, she had to hear about all these things, but we're still friends, so this is good. But I said, Cheryl, why can't we just give money per capita where we know the need is, let them talk to the community and go. Like, what, the state's got money, why can't we just distribute it that way? It's logical. And she said, well, great idea. This would be a terrific focus group for you to do. I was like, okay. So I went and I conducted focus group after focus group after focus group. And in those days, they had a state jet, which I'm sure they have many now, but I was allowed to use that jet and go to the most remote areas. And that was quite enlightening because I got to speak to very remote and very dense urban. So remote, rural, dense, urban, very interesting information because it all boiled down to one thing. And that one thing was the worker who was at the meeting that said, I have a question and I need you to answer it from a policy perspective. And I said, okay. She said, you know, you guys are telling us to make everybody independent. We have to talk to our clients. We have to sit across the table from our clients and everybody has to be independent. Now, remember, this is the Clinton years. I'm in the States. We're working on like, you know, complete welfare reform, you know, zero tolerance for not having a job, blah, blah, blah. And everybody had to have a job. And it didn't matter if you had a PhD, you would go flip burgers. Guess how that long? It didn't last very long. Didn't last very long. But she said, I have to sit across my clients and tell them that they have to be independent. And tomorrow, if you don't give us this grant, I'm going to be sitting in the client seat. So how do you want us to talk about independence when we're not independent? And that was my aha moment. That was the moment where all the experiences that I had had previous brought me to, I got it, I get it, I understand it, and I'm gonna work on it. And I thanked her profusely, and we were friends for many years after that. Even though she was mad at the state, she hated all of us, but we remained friends. Why? Because it was the first time anybody had heard her. The power of listening is unbelievable. It's actually unbelievable. It can move mountains. So I took that question, which was fantastic, and I went to my boss and I said, Cheryl, she's absolutely right. This is a dichotomous system. We have to apply for grants. We're giving grants and we're not creating any sustainability. I don't know if I had all the words exactly the way that I have them now, because sustainability wasn't really being talked about. Neither was social enterprise, really. But she said, no, but the way that the system is set up is that, we have a purse, right? $300 million. Everybody has to apply from 80 whatever counties, and we issue it. And I said, but the system is broken. It's broken. This is not a system that's going to last. And so I went to my profs and I said, guys, we have to change the system. We're teaching dependency. If we really want true independence and we want service in a timely fashion, you can't expect people to jump through hoops, apply for a grant when there's a flood. Like, this is not going to work, or there's a crisis in the community. They need to act, and they need to act now. So what if we took money out of the equation and we created money in a sustainable way? Anybody want to guess what I was told? No, can't be done. No, this is never going to happen. No, you're in the wrong field. No, you're crazy. Not going to happen. And the more I heard the word no from taking money out of the equation, the more I knew I was onto something. Why are we teaching systems of dependency? Why are we teaching ways of doing work that actually don't move the needle forward towards sustainability? And why are we not supporting the community and meeting the community needs where they are? So my life's work around social enterprise, there was no words then. My whole thing was, I'm taking money out of the equation. I'm doing some kind of business activity. I'm going to put it into helping people. I didn't know the words. There was no words, and I just had to make it up. So 1995, I'm 25 years old, and I'm on fire about this, like on fire. And, they're like, oh God, she's a lost cause. This is it. But they know that I'm onto something, and they're not helping me for reasons because they have their different belief system, and that's okay. But I met with everybody that I could on my off time. I just wanted to understand from the community perspective what would be helpful. How could we do this work without creating further dependency, because you're continuing to dig a well that will never be full, and you're continuing to beg, right? So I didn't want to be a social worker that had to put my hand out and say, help me do my job to serve the community. I wanted to be self-sufficient and proud. I come from a family and a system that has been independent, that has been fierce, actually. And my dad ran a social enterprise, but he never even knew these words. He helped everybody in the company, education, no matter what, healthcare, no matter what. These things were unheard of in Iran. Like, nobody had ever heard of it, but he did all of those things. Nobody knew what the words were. He's just a good guy. But I heard that, I saw different examples of people showing up late at night saying, I'm hurting, something's going on, whatever. And I was a little bit of an eavesdropper, I'm gonna be honest, as a kid. Sorry, it's true. But it helped me understand when people needed help. So 1995 to 2000, I was on it. Are we going to set up a charity? Are we going to set up a not-for-profit? How are we going to run business? What is it going to work? And all these things, I doodled and I created, and I now know these are called vision boards. And by the way, everything that I put on a vision board has come to pass, every single thing. So 2000 comes around, I'm doing these crazy amounts of contracts in the US. I'm a woman of color doing numbers, for God's sake, during the Clinton years, you can't beat it. But then I wanted to go home. I needed to come home because it was getting wild. Like they wanted me to run for the Democratic Party. They wanted me to move to Washington. They wanted me to be my passport. And I was like, no. So Cheryl and Cheryl's boss's boss, Harold, both independently gave me feedback when I took them to lunch and said what was going on. They're like, go home, honey, go. This is, you need to be surrounded by family. Like we've given our life to this, and it's going to be a different life if you have loved ones around and you can spend time with them as opposed to being in DC, which is so transient and so on. So I listened, and it changed my life. I came back to Toronto, and my mom and my godmother Dora and two Pakistani women are sitting around talking about this thing called Aangen. So I happened to stop by the table, and I'm like, what are you doing? And they're like, oh, we're starting a new group. And I was like, okay, you're starting a group, fantastic. And we're gonna help immigrant women because they're lonely, they're being abused. You know, they're coming to the Wednesday night meditations and they're telling us about how hard their lives are, and we wanna do something. So we're starting a group of empowerment and education and all this. And I was like, oh, this is so good. So I get up to leave the table, and they're like, no, sit down. And I was like, oh, okay. You studied this thing called social work. And I was like, yes, I did. Okay, you're gonna run it. And I was like, oh, wait, what's happening? So they're like, no, you're running this because you know how to do it, and we're starting it, but you have to run it. And I was like, okay. So, and then one of the women at the table was like, we need to apply for grants. And I was like, actually, can we talk about that? Please don't. And give me 1 year. If you give me 1 year and not apply for grants, I don't know what we're gonna do or how we're gonna do it, but we'll find a way to raise money, but we just won't do it in that way because I know that system too well and it's not pretty. So they gave me the 1 year in 2000, and now we're at year 2023. So, and we've never looked back. So let me tell you the accidental ways and the interesting serendipitous ways or organic ways that Aangen has evolved. You know, we started with nothing other than a great idea, and, you know, tried to figure it out day by day. You know, whenever a woman needed help or somebody else needed help, and I would call people and say, I need $100 from you, I need $100 from you, I need this, and then we'd just do it and take care of it. But I'm like, we have to generate, like, so how do we generate? And then I went through like many formulations and machinations of how to generate. And I did my own, you know, I did subcontracting for other gigs. Like I would take on small, you know, 2-day, 3-day gigs so I could sustain my life. And also then build on, you know, on the couple days that I had off, and I kept doing it. And we landed, you know, in interesting conversations. And one of the conversations that I was having was with a cafe owner in the neighborhood. And I said, oh, you know, we do this thing, and if you ever want to donate, like, you know, coffee and donuts for like a meeting that we're having or whatever. And then I'm like turning around to leave, and she says, hey, by the way, do you know where I can get farm fresh eggs? And I was like, yeah, actually my mom lives near Orangeville now, and I actually pick up eggs for my family. Like, I'll grab you a dozen next week. Grabbed her a dozen, brought them to her, and got a call the next day. Oh my God, these are the best eggs I've ever had. Can you bring me 5 dozen? So a thing started to happen. 5 dozen became 10 dozen. Then the farmer started yelling at me and saying, no, you gotta go to the, I'm yelling, I mean, gentle. She's like, you're taking all my eggs. So, you know, my neighbors are getting upset. So anyway, so I started to find other sources. And then I was like, hey, so if she needs eggs, there might be other people. And then word of mouth came. And so this person wanted eggs, and then they started to ask for butter. And we actually had a butter supplier, which was the only local creamery left in all of Ontario. And so I would drive up to Alliston and pick up butter. I didn't have a car. I used to borrow my mom's car. Okay, guys, this is how funny it is. Like, I'm picking up eggs from these different farmers. I'm running around getting butter. And then somebody started asking for maple syrup. And then there was a maple syrup sign, and I ran and got some maple syrup. And all of a sudden we had a going concern, right? We had to deliver, I don't know, 50, 80, 100 dozen eggs a week. And then jugs of maple syrup, and then, you know, butter, and then honey came along. And so all of a sudden, this thing happened. And one cafe referred to another cafe, referred to another cafe. And so then I was like, I can't keep borrowing my mom's car. This is kind of embarrassing now. I'm now into my 30s, and this is, you know, not happening. So anyways, a vehicle came along, and that happened. And then before you knew it, I started to think about, do I really need these other contracts? Like, if I got 10 more of these cafes, could I give up this or that? And I ended up doing exactly that. I ended up building it. So from me working part-time with about 40-some thousand dollar sales, and never mind the, you know, the payout. So I had very little left, probably nothing left. But then I just started pounding the pavement when I got really good suppliers, and I built it to $350,000 in 2 years. Then I could actually do the kind of social work I wanted to do. I didn't have to worry about, you know, what other business. Well, so what happened? One of the women that I was supporting as a client, who came through another agency whose funders did not want to increase her counseling services, and she's been with us now 10 years. They said she needs help, and we just can't leave more resources. And so Aangen became the safety net under the safety net, kind of. And so we took on the client, we started to work with her. She had no housing, and she had incredible marginalization. I mean, incredible marginalization, and was the survivor of the worst domestic violence I had ever witnessed in my life. The PTSD, the trauma, I mean, it was just so many layers. But I found a housing worker, and this housing worker was such an ally, and I hope, Carla, you'll meet her soon, because I've invited her to join our board. And I spoke to her and I said, so we have a situation, and we need to gently massage and figure it out. And we somehow, without incriminating myself too much, we found ways to get some housing to support this individual. A week later, the same housing worker calls me and says, so dude, my office cleaner is AWOL. And I'm like, yeah, and then we both went, oh, yes. And I knew the woman in the background who we were serving had done cleaning, you know? And she was desperately looking for a job because she wanted to be independent. And please know, people, in my humble opinion, want to be independent. They want to work. They want to be self-sufficient. They want to be self-determined. I mean, it's not a lie when we say, you know, people want to have some level of control in their lives. Don't we all, though? Like, this is normal, right? Nobody really wants to be dependent, you know, unless there's some very dire circumstances, and that's the reality. So we had one little office, like literally no bigger than a postage stamp. And I asked the woman, would you be interested? And I didn't finish my question. She's like, yes, I don't want Aangen paying my rent. I'm very unhappy about it, and I want to do this work. So give me work. And here's where the social justice piece gets a little interesting. We had to find methods of how to make this work happen. And what I mean by that is when people are extremely marginalized, they may not have certain things that allow them to go on payroll, or they may not have certain things that allow them to, you know, operate in society as a, you know, as someone who has access to services and abilities. So we have to come up with creative, and I do mean creative, ways to make things happen. We did, and I'm very proud of that. And not only did she clean that office, but dear God, as soon as people found out we were doing this thing and supporting clients, and it kind of evolved. I know nothing about cleaning, let me tell you. I knew very, very little. And the woman who asked us to do this actually said, okay, this is what we pay our cleaner. This is what you need to do. This is how it used to happen, you know, so on and so forth. And I was like, okay, great. Now I know more. This is what, you know, you got to bill and, you know, these increments. And so we figured it out. And that's what we did. We figured it out. And so people started to request. And then the same housing worker calls me and says, I have another client who used to have a cleaning job. He got fired. Why did he get fired? He got fired because he wasn't feeding his body, and he got ulcers and he started to vomit. That's what happened. And his employer didn't know the backstory. I don't know whether it would have changed anything, but he started to get very, very ill. And so absolutely, we had to address food security, we had to address the housing. And then I said, of course I could give an employment letter, but I need more jobs because I can't make them up. I never set out to do this, but I'm happy to facilitate. So I became the facilitator of things that just started to happen. And they all came about from the needs that the community had. So we started to do more and more cleaning, and then the shelter system found out about our work and that we were actually employing clients. And I got a call from Fred Victor saying, okay, we're setting up this something new with the city, can you help us? Okay, so all of a sudden, little me part-time and 2 part-time cleaners had to grow to 3 full-time people and 12 part-time cleaners because we got a gig to help women not sleep on the streets at night. So we had to set up shelter beds every single night, and tear them down in the morning so breakfast could be served and so on. So we did that, and then if anybody recalls the winter of 2018, which was incredibly horrible and very severe, people started dying on the streets. So the city immediately had to set up respites. Well, I got a call from that shelter director, and she said, you need to come down here like right now. So I raced down to the Better Living Center, and I have seen war. You know this now. I have never seen that. And it was literally a war zone. It was unbelievable. The amount of need, the amount of people, the amount of, wow, right? It was intense. So we rolled up our sleeves and we're like, okay, what do we need to do? How do we do it? Because we were partners, we had to figure it out. And they leaned in, and that was important. So they're like, we need meals. We need 1,000 meals a day. So I was like, oh my goodness. Okay. So this work is not for anybody who's faint at heart, because 1,000 meals a day is scary. So I didn't have a kitchen. I didn't have staff. I didn't have anything. So right away called Anna Bilau, very, very good friend, and also someone who has been a strong supporter of social enterprise. And by the way, if you find politicians who are cool and get it, align with them, because that is a good thing to have on side. And also, we never asked for money. We didn't take a grant, like Carla said, never took a grant. So we weren't bugging anybody for money. We just needed space. So we got space, hired everybody I could from, you know, we worked in restaurants at this point, right? Like we were sort of bringing eggs and maple and butter and all these things. And so I was like, what do we do? How do you do this? Somebody help me understand. So I literally got my own food handler certificate, got all these things. So I knew what I was doing. And then I hired a team and we went to work and we produced 1,000 meals a day. And Aangen then grew to, you know, 8 full-time people and about 30 part-time people, and it just sort of boomed. And so we have now made and served well over 1 million meals to the shelters. And it didn't end there, because, you know, when you're listening to the community and something like a pandemic comes around, you're like, oh, okay, we can't serve the way we used to serve. We've got to pivot. And you've tried some soup now. We pivoted. This is what we pivoted to. And why? So I have sat on the Parkdale Community Food Bank board for over a decade now. And I'm very involved with food security, as you may have guessed. But what I know to be true is when a pandemic happens or when a crisis happens, the most vulnerable will be affected the most. So seniors isolated in their homes, people on the street, we saw this, right? People didn't want to live in shelters. They set up encampments. They needed food. So I challenged my team and said, guys, we need to make a meal that is as easy to make as tea and toast. Because people will turn to a tea and toast diet because they don't have other access. Okay, we know this. They'll also turn to a craft dinner diet, and we all know how healthy that is. Or, other stuff. How do we make meals that will support people to get more than half their nutrition in one meal, not the entire calorie count, but half the nutrients your body needs? And we got to take into mind teeth, right? What we know, teeth, dental issues are a thing. We need to keep in mind swallowing, because sometimes that's a thing. Cholesterol, high blood pressure, diabetes, like all these things. So we decided to apply for our first grant ever. Why? Because we didn't have $50,000 lying around to buy a dehydrator or hire a nutritionist. So it was time to ask for a little bit of help, and in turn for the money we gave 5,000 units of the soups we started to develop to the Parkdale Food Bank to ask for help. Taste it. How's it working for you? Are you having trouble? We partnered with CNIB to make sure the lettering was okay for people who may have visual concerns. So we did that. We made a thing. And that's what we needed to do at the time. And not only did we end up, having the ability to distribute to people who were in encampments, in, the seniors and so on, but we also, when the situation in Ukraine happened, I was packing boxes of food. My last birthday, I spent packing, coats and warm products and things like that, and soups. Best way to spend my birthday, I love it. But you know what? I was like, wait a second, I'm holding this can of soup in my hand. And I happened to have a couple of these lying around my office. And I was like, okay, hold on a minute. This is one meal. This is one meal. I could send at least 50 or 80 of these for the weight of this. And so I called Global Medic. Actually, the CBC did a piece and they introduced us to Global Medic, which is the best thing they ever did, because I called them, I'm like, Rahul, if I raised enough money to send thousands of soups to Ukraine, will you ship them? He goes, directly to the front line, I'll make sure they get into the hospitals, do it now. And I was like, okay, I'm on it. So this was not grants, this was me calling everybody I knew, like, in the world, and I'm like, you need to support this because we need to send food and we have a solution. And you know what they did? They sent it right to the doctors. And that was perfect because they didn't have to worry about cooking our meals. They literally added a cup of water or whatever, cup and a third, depending on the recipe, and then covered it. And they had a full meal that was nutritious for patients who needed it. And that's when I knew we need to focus on this. And so we have now collapsed our catering department and our farm product department to focus entirely on soups, on meals that are dehydrated, because they're easy to ship, they're easy to prepare, and they're nutritious. And underneath it all, we hire, in our Chance for Change program, people who are marginalized. As I told you, our first cleaners, were marginalized. But that policy of hiring folks has gone through every single thing that we've done. So we specifically hire, in this particular instance, we have a partnership with Covenant House, and they train the young people in culinary or, you know, food handling, and then they get job experience with us. And, you know, we're building on how to partner more and more with local farmers. Now we're working with Not Far From the Tree to look at food, I mean, we do a lot of food rescue, just so you know. All the rice and things in here have been donated. Otherwise they would have been in, you know, landfills. We can't afford to do that, people. We have a planet here to think about, and we have a purpose to think about. So when we think about social enterprise, we have to think about at least 4 elements, in my humble opinion: people, planet, purpose, and profit. And profit is not a dirty word here. Profit actually to me equals service, because we can take that money and give more and more service in the world. And that's, to me, what social enterprise is, and what social justice, in a sense, needs to be. So, thank you. Thank you.